So George Anderson, he's the MLA for Nanaimo-Lantzville, which is super interesting because he was also elected as a city councillor there back when he was 20. I've known George for decades, and I found him to be trustworthy, friendly, and always willing to share his mind, but be respectful of those around him. He actually went to law school at Osgoode School of Law out in Toronto, and he practiced at one of Canada's largest law firms before coming back to serve the community that helped raise him. He has worked in public service, which has earned him the BC Achievement Award. And I think you're wearing the pin for that today.
I am.
That's a gift from the Lieutenant Governor back in 2016. Now, you grew up in Nanaimo, were valedictorian, and then headed to Osgoode. What was it like moving to Bay Street, and then what brought you back?
Well, I have to say, it's fascinating, being able to have had the opportunity to, represent my community at the age of 20, where I was elected 29 votes from third place. I say that because 29 votes from third is much better than saying fourth, but out of 28 candidates beating former mayors and councillors, and really getting that foundation of working within a very large corporation, which with $2 billion worth of assets, helping pass our first 25-year transportation master plan, voting against waste to energy facility that would have created a lot of environmental damage in our community. But then leaving public life and going off to law school in Toronto, where I also spent some time at a legal clinic in Switzerland, got to meet their lead negotiator for the Iran-US nuclear deal, Brexit on the EU side, and then working on Bay Street really gave me that broad perspective of how businesses, entrepreneurs are really driving our economy, but also how to take those benefits and help serve the public interest. So being able to have both perspectives from the private sector and public sector, I think has been a phenomenal experience for me and how I approach my work as an MLA.
Yeah, and I think I wish more politicians had that viewpoint and that experience of being able to serve the community, but also understand what business leaders are going through. Because oftentimes it becomes a bit about the bad business people versus their community, when in reality, a lot of business people are helping to drive innovation, create jobs and opportunities. So I love that you've had that Bay Street experience and you're now able to apply it back to our local community here. When you were elected at 20 to Nanaimo, what was that experience like and what was going through your head at that time?
Well, it was a while ago now, unfortunately, but what I would say, it was tremendously humbling to think that the community said, hey, we believe in you to help make good decisions for our community. Our slogan at that point in time was "The future starts now," and it was really about how do we create equal opportunity within community. So I still remember going out door knocking and speaking with this woman who, unfortunately, she would try to catch the bus in the morning, would miss it because it left too late, and at the end of the day, she wouldn't be able to catch it because it left too early. So imagine at that time of the bus rates being the minimum wage being at about $8 an hour, she was spending $60 on taxis to get to and from work. I think for myself, I was 20 when I was elected. The next youngest was 60, and our mayor was 73. So to put that in perspective, 53 years had gone by before I was contemplated or born. But making sure that when we're building community, we are building community that represents a wide variety of people, whether it's young people who are going to be looking for careers in their community, seniors who are looking to downsize and find homes, which can take into account the type of lifestyle they want with their grandchildren or whatever. So that requires a wide variety of people to be involved and engaged. And that's the perspective that I brought every single day, whether it was talking about the electronic town hall, which at this point in time would not be considered innovative. But at that point in time, it was pretty significant for the fact that it was the fourth time ever local government was given an award for innovation, and that was from the Institute of Public Administrators of Canada. We then won a provincial award as well, whether it was fighting for restored rail on Vancouver Island. These are the type of things that you can end up having when you have a diverse council at the table.
So you were already focused on transportation back at that time, and now here we are, years later, you're back fighting for transportation, but not just for your local community, but provincially.
Well, I'd say fighting for a number of things, making sure that people in British Columbia can get ahead, that they feel that there's someone who's got their back for them, and someone who's had different types of experiences from being in the public sector and being in the private sector. But it also is, again, I do have the role as Parliamentary Secretary for Transit, which allows me to discuss ports or SkyTrains here in the Lower Mainland, rail, and working alongside the Minister of Transportation and Transit as to how we best deliver those services for British Columbians.
And it's a complicated issue. Now, the budget recently came out, and I noticed there was quite a bit of spending. So you do have a business background and you have a public service background. What's your opinion on how fiscal prudence fits into the agenda when it comes to large-scale projects such as transportation?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I can tell you when it comes to transportation, what I hear from people across British Columbia, whether they're in Nanaimo, Vancouver, or Castlegar, is that they want more transportation. And we've had the single largest investment in transportation and infrastructure in British Columbia's history, where we've seen additional investment to ensure that TransLink, the services that people in the Lower Mainland rely upon to get to and from work, are stable and are growing. Transportation is, again, one of those aspects of government policy that actually creates a level playing field and also ensures that there's equal opportunity. If someone's not able to figure out how they're going to get to work, or is spending a majority of their income on getting to and from work or picking up their kids from soccer practice, that's a problem. And so our government's been very focused on how do we make sure that people can actually be successful, and that's included policies such as making sure that transit is free for people under the age of 12. That is strong public policy, and it's something that I know that British Columbians have continued to ask for. One of the great things of transportation and transit in that ministry is that people want more of it. But right now, we are focused on delivering and keeping the services, the core services of government moving. But to get things like the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain, it does cost money, but those type of investments provide a return on investment for everyday British Columbians.
Yeah, especially if people can stay here and afford to live and work, right?
Well, I'd ask you, Brandon, do you take transit in the Lower Mainland?
Oh, I do. I use the SkyTrain every day. Have you tried driving downtown on a regular work day? It's a stressful experience. So,
absolutely.
No, I'm fortunate to live in New Westminster near a SkyTrain and work near a SkyTrain. So I think the fact that we're extending these phenomenal transportation systems to other parts of Greater Vancouver, it's going to make life easier for people. There's no question.
Soon the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain is going to bring people all the way to Surrey to Waterfront Station in just a little over an hour. That's pretty impressive, and that's going to create even more economic opportunity for our province.
Certainly. I just hope it's not full by the time it gets to my area.
Well, I can't promise you that, but...
So you've been a city councillor, George. You've been a regional district director, a law firm associate, board chair, now an MLA. What has surprised you most about how leadership actually works in this country?
Well, I think everyone has their different types of leadership style. I'm one who really enjoys being able to have conversation, collaborative, work with people, and also just make a decision, because at the end of the day, we can't continue to sort of just sit there and say, hey, we are going to wait years upon years to figure out what the directions ought to be. And that's one of the things that I do appreciate about Premier Eby, is that when it came to making decisions on things such as long-term care facilities, also healthcare in British Columbia, he's made significant decisions. Like, we are building the first medical school in Western Canada in almost 60 years. People wonder why we don't have enough family doctors. Well, why didn't previous generations think that it was important, as we saw populations increasing, to make those type of investments? Similarly with Premier John Horgan, former Premier John Horgan, and making sure that there was investments in things such that really help the people on the margins of society, such as getting interest off of student loans. Government has a tremendous ability and power to do good, and that's why I'm very proud to be part of a government that has always been focused on delivering those results for people.
Yeah, there's no question. Lots of spending and lots of impact in the community. I do as a financial person, I of course like to see balanced budgets. So maybe at some point in the future that may be a possibility. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I can tell you is that deficits is not just a British Columbia issue. I'd say look at Alberta right now, $10 billion deficit. And guess what Alberta has that British Columbia doesn't, Brandon?
Cold winters.
Oil. They have oil revenues.
Yeah.
And yet still at negative 10 a $10 billion deficit. And let me tell you, it does get cold in British Columbia. I was in Prince George for the Natural Resources Forum, and let me tell you, there's nothing more sincere than going to Prince George in the middle of January. So.
True. I've been to Red Deer in January, and I think it's quite similar.
But what I can tell you about this budget is very much focused on ensuring that the results that people expect, such as delivering on healthcare, delivering on housing, that's where government is focused on, and that's where we need to. If you look across the world right now, there's significant inflation. And also, there's a certain president in the United States who is causing inflation to go crazy across the world. This is the fact that we're in a deficit is not something that's unique just to British Columbia.
No, totally fair. Now, a lot of Canadians in this country, they feel that we're at a bit of a turning point. As someone who's worked in local government, the legal system, and now provincial politics, what do you think this moment requires from people leading our country compared to previous generations?
Well, I think it's ensuring that people have that northern star, that they know where we're going to. I think that's one of the things that Prime Minister Carney said so directly to the entire world, is that the old world order doesn't exist in the way that it does. And that means bringing forward plans and ideas that put the best foot forward for people in our country. That means having a plan and sticking to that plan. That means saying, hey, we're dealing with artificial intelligence. Well, how do we incorporate that into our systems rather than shying away from it? That means using every tool in the toolbox to be able to ensure that we build housing in the most efficient ways possible. When I was a city councillor, the average price of a home when I left was $310,000 in Nanaimo. Today it's about $890,000, and I can tell you people in our generation, because I think you're older than me, Brandon, so anyway, that being said, people in my generation, Brandon, feel that housing is a little expensive, but we need to do everything that we can. And so I think leaders today have to give that clear viewpoint as to how we solve the biggest challenges ahead of us. And it has to be clear and understandable to them, and also made in a way that they feel those results of the decisions that are made.
No, that's a thoughtful answer, George. Now, with increased spending does come increased taxes. So who do you feel should pay the extra taxes?
Well, I can say it very emphatically that what I would say is that when I speak to students at Vancouver Island University or at UBC, or just yesterday I was at BCIT, they're saying they want to see investments in transportation infrastructure. They want to see investments in healthcare. They want to see childcare. I had a freight transportation roundtable where I brought forward 40 leaders in the transportation and logistics area, and shockingly, what those CEOs were saying was that they wanted to see more investment in childcare and off-peak childcare. So are there people who can pay more? There probably are. But I think at the end of the day, how are we delivering services that make sure that people feel those services is what's most important.
Mm-hmm. No, it's fair. Yeah, like my wife and I, we've had a child, and seeing the cost of childcare, and hearing from folks in our community, if you have trouble conceiving, that is a real big problem. I know your government has done some work on that regard previously about supporting IVF, which is important work, as the birth rate in Canada is so low, and a healthy country requires healthy families. So very interesting. Now, what do you hope to see from Canada over the next decade, George? So not necessarily as an NDP elected official, but George Anderson.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I show up all the time as George Anderson. But that being said, what I'd hope for Canada is prosperity for everyone. We live in one of the greatest, dare I say, the greatest country in the world, where we have abundance of land, we have abundance of natural resources, again, I was at the Natural Resources Forum in Prince George, and what I saw there were people who were ready to figure out how we accomplish big things for our country. And that's what we need to be focused on, is how do we accomplish big things and ensure that every Canadian citizen feels the outcomes of the decisions that we've made, whether it's a mining project, whether it's the expansion of ports, ensuring that people have the ability to raise their families and just have a good life. That's what I would hope over the next while. And I walk into the legislature before I go into the chamber in the rotunda. There are 4 murals: agriculture, fisheries, mining, and forestry. And that is part of the key to British Columbia's success, in my opinion. I feel that's why the murals are so large. And so I think as we look as a country, how do we become more resilient? It's by looking at ourselves and investing in Canadians.
Now, you've already talked a bit about housing affordability, George, access to opportunities. These are national conversations that hit differently in smaller communities. What do you wish more Canadians and leaders across Canada knew about what people in small communities are going through?
But what I can say, having gone and toured Castlegar, Fruitvale, and Nelson last summer, what they're saying is, like, we have good ideas as to how we can achieve prosperity for our communities. We have the tools, and they're doing great things. I was meeting with the mayor of oh goodness, I'm forgetting right now. This is a few weeks ago. Regardless, the fact was that this mayor was telling me about how housing in his community is affordable, that there are jobs there, that they just want a little bit of support. And I think we ought to be going and having conversations with them. Small communities are the bedrock of our province, and I think so long as we're ensuring that there is proper services, people in smaller communities also deserve to be able to have the same benefits as someone who lives in downtown Vancouver. Again, I think that making sure that they have access to all the services, whether it's transit and others, that's how we end up building the type of country that I would hope that all of us want to live in.
Right, but it sometimes can be tough, right? Because in a heavily populated area like Greater Vancouver, there's more taxpayers, more economies of scale as it relates to programs and investment opportunities. While in a smaller community, there's simply less people, and infrastructure might be more expensive and complicated to set up. So how do you balance the needs of sort of the smaller communities that are less densely populated with the needs of the many in the city?
Mm-hmm. Well, my job at the provincial government is to obviously be a representative for Nanaimo-Lantzville, which interestingly does have a large urban community of the city of Nanaimo and the district of Lantzville, which is about 5,000 people. I think it's important to go and talk to them and say, how do you want your community to best be serviced? Does that mean having, because I can tell you, some people choose to live in smaller communities because they don't want what's in Vancouver. But at the same time, when it comes to access to mental health resources or transit, those are social services. Like, for example, you mentioned using transit every day to get to and from work. That's not necessarily going to be the option for someone who lives in Castlegar, for example, because the system isn't set up that way. But are there ways to be able to adjust or adapt the system so that people who are getting to and from their hospital appointments or going to see their grandmother, grandfather in a long-term care facility, or get to and from university, can they do those things so that they can live the life that they want to and ultimately be successful? I think that there are strategies, and that's why speaking to people in those communities and actually developing policy from that lens is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to have boots on the ground and people that care. So how fitting is it for you to come back to Nanaimo-Lantzville after representing the city of Nanaimo? Has the political dynamic changed now that you're coming in from like a provincial perspective versus being a sort of local representative?
Well, the thing with politics is it's about people. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're at the local level or you're at the provincial level or federal level. Delivering results is what matters. I worked in downtown Vancouver at very large law firms, and what I can tell you is that being a lawyer, you have to deliver results for your clients, and similarly, the people of British Columbia expect us to be delivering results for them as I have been trying to work to develop a provincial port strategy, or the work that I've been doing with the Minister of Transportation and Transit on this shipping and freight roundtable discussion, or meeting with various stakeholders, because at the end of the day, British Columbians expect us to have to be dealing with the issues that are most important to them. And that's what I heard just this past weekend when I had my town hall in Nanaimo, is that, hey, housing is an issue that we want you to be working on. We appreciate that you opened a new urgent and primary care facility in our community. That's the type of work that I'm focused on, or the government's been focused on, and we're going to continue to do those things.
Politics is becoming increasingly polarizing, not just south of the border, but here in Canada. How can political leaders challenge those with different perspectives while still being respectful?
Mm-hmm. Well, for myself, I'm not a particularly partisan person. I've sat on the Canadian Bar Association's Access to Justice Committee. I've been on the Art Gallery Board. I've sat on Board of Governors. Volunteerism has been part of who I am. And I think the noise that we see on social media is part of what you're talking about that polarization. But when I go to a community event such as the Chuck-a-Puck that they had for the Help Fill a Dream, people weren't saying, I'm conservative, I'm New Democrat, I'm whatever. They're like, we need to come together as a community to try to help this child who's going through significant difficulties. So if that's the environment that we're working within, I think there's much more that brings us together than actually divides us. So I would actually sort of push back against your question and say, yeah, are there people who continue to say that the world is highly polarized? Sure, there are people who are saying that. There's echo chambers of people who are bringing that forward. But at the end of the day, when I'm speaking to members in community, I'm meeting with people across the province, they're saying, I want what's best for the province, which is for everyone to do well and for everyone to be prosperous.
I agree with you. I consider myself nonpartisan most of the time as well. There'll be certain policy decisions that I may agree with certain parties and others, and that may shift over time. I think that's a reasonable way to look, as opposed to bleeding orange, blue, or red.
Well, there are some things that are just not debatable. Recently, the Legislative Assembly was debating whether or not human rights should still exist. One of the members of the Legislative Assembly brought forward a bill to repeal the Human Rights Code and Tribunal. I don't think that we should be talking about this issue in 2026. I believe that human rights are unalienable and that people should have the right to pursue a life that is happy and good for their family and their children and their friends. So I don't think that human rights is a partisan issue either. So I think where we end up falling down these rabbit holes is when you can see that there's a motive to try to divide people. And my hope and my role is to try to bring people together.
We certainly need a little bit more of that. Now, there is a growing sense among Canadians that institutions aren't necessarily keeping up with the pace of change. Now, as someone who's been inside local government, the legal system, and now provincial politics, where do you think we're falling behind?
Well, what I can tell you is that is there a need to adapt? Absolutely. There's a time where we didn't have the internet. Now we do. We're looking at artificial intelligence, and now we're looking at how do we best use that within the systems that we have. That being said, we have to be working within a regulatory framework or framework that ensures that people are also kept safe. I can tell you I've put forward a private members bill that looks to advance and build housing faster in British Columbia, because today the most expensive material in construction is delay. And every month and year of delay are costs that are passed on to the end user. Trying to figure out a way to ensure that young people, renters, families, and seniors can have affordable housing is also not a partisan issue. But we have to make sure that we're doing it in the right way. And so for myself, I've met with the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. I've met with the Urban Development Institute, but I've also met with groups of affordable housing advocates such as Homes for Living in Victoria, Abundant Housing in Vancouver. And these are people coming together saying, hey, as you said, the systems are a bit slow. They need to adapt. And I've said, sure, let's figure out how to do this and work together, because housing isn't a partisan issue. And with my bill, I put forward a number of amendments to the committee for them to consider. Similarly, with government is streamlined significantly through Bill 15, the Infrastructure Projects Act, which aims to use qualified professionals. We've seen a mine in northern British Columbia get its permit within 8 months, which historically it would be significantly longer. Government is there doing what's best, but at the same time needs to make sure that the public interest and people are kept at the heart of those policies.
Completely agree. Now, when we look at the, let's say, growing role of government, how do you balance the private sector innovation and productivity with too many layers of red tape or bureaucracy?
Well, it would be great if you gave me an example, but I just gave you an example where my private member's bill talks about actually reducing red tape.
And I'm not looking. Sorry.
Oh no, for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, here's an example of where
You're trying to
it
help.
is
Yeah.
trying to help for sure. And similarly, one of the first things that I did when I became an MLA, a member of the Legislative Assembly, and this was because the Premier said he was wanting to restart or reset his relationship with the business community, is I started a Business Leaders Advisory Council, brought forward people to the table in the investment industry, clean energy, construction, tourism, brought them together to be able to hear their ideas about how we can actually do better in government. And again, I think it's through having those ongoing conversations and dialogue with people that you're able to find the best solutions.
How long has that been going on? That sounds pretty interesting.
Almost 2 years, as long as I've been an MLA.
Love it. Cool.
Yeah.
And what's been some of the insights that you've taken out of that those meetings?
I would say one of the great things is that, again, you get to see a lot of the positivity of politics. Business owners, you were saying that sometimes they get typecast in a negative light. These individuals are building businesses. They're employing people in communities. They are community builders, and so why would we not want to ensure that we're engaging in conversation with them? I've heard, hey, government needs to streamline, but what I've also heard is government needs to build more housing, government needs to ensure that there's childcare, and also there needs to be more healthcare options for people. Well, how do you have those things? It requires spending money, and that's where I think government has been focused on trying to ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent in the most efficient way possible, which is to deliver the core services that they're relying upon to be able to have a prosperous life.
Yeah, lots of moving parts. No decision is easy.
Yep. I would say a big thing when I left local government, and occasionally I would speak at a high school or university, I'd say the government's like a super tanker. If you want to change the direction, it takes some time.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. It's moving a big ship takes quite a while. Course correcting takes longer, and you can't do it alone. Versus having one captain on a ship, when you're running a province, you've got a lot of stakeholders, a ton of decision makers. So, what would you say is the big difference between John Horgan's leadership style and David Eby's?
Well, what I can tell you is that from what I've heard, I've only met former Premier Horgan once, and he was very jovial. He was on the way out, so maybe that was why he had the extra kick in his step. But what I can say about Premier Eby is that he is laser focused on results. And that's what I'm focused on as the MLA for Nanaimo-Lantzville, is how do we make sure that results are felt by everyday people. I go back to a comment that I made earlier. Why is it that it's been 60 years since there's been a medical school built in Western Canada? This government's doing it, opening 126 new spaces at UBC so that the next generation of doctors can be trained now. There was a period of time where nothing was being done to deal with those infrastructure gaps or healthcare issues. I'm grateful for the fact that Premier Eby has taken on that approach. Even though it's been difficult, it has been challenging, but those matters like healthcare and housing, we see housing, the price of rent across British Columbia coming down, and that's because of his leadership.
Yeah, no, it's I've certainly felt. I have, I have some tenants, and I'll be giving them a discount on their rent soon. So I think it's good. I think ultimately it was getting out of hand there. We had too much immigration and not enough supply and housing. So good on your government for helping to address that issue. I've always known you as being a very optimistic person, George. Since joining public service again, has that changed your perspective, or has that opened up new opportunities for optimism?
Well, what I can tell you, Brandon, is I have never been a glass half empty. I've always thought the glass is half full. And if the glass is half empty, my viewpoint is that the glass is refillable. So when I look at our province, I look at our country, I look at our communities, I think that there's a lot to be hopeful for. Sure, certainly there are challenges that we're going through right now, but one of the reasons I chose to run, there's a book that I read, it's called If Science is to Save Us. And the premise of that book is whether or not we have a duty to be a good ancestor. And that means continuing to fight, to continue to have discussions, continue to move the dial forward, which makes life better for whoever that comes after us. And so if you're going to call me an eternal optimist, I think that's absolutely fair, and I'm happy to wear that moniker because there are very many positive stories coming out of our province, and I'm grateful to live in the best place on earth.
I think it's on our license plate still, isn't it?
Not anymore, unfortunately.
We better get that added back. You got involved in public life at age 20. I think most young Canadians perhaps are wondering how they can make a difference, but aren't sure where to start. What would be your advice to those younger Canadians?
My advice to them would be to show up. You will have people tell you it's not your time, to wait till later. Well, waiting is not the solution. It's actually showing up in community. It's whether it is volunteering with, as I have as the former president of Literacy Central Vancouver Island, which was focused on increasing literacy rates for people, whether it is volunteering with whatever organization. Being an active member of community is so important, and I think part of the division that you were talking about earlier is from a lack of community connections. If anything that COVID taught us is that people are a social species, and it's through interactions like the ones that you and I are having that you can end up building much stronger community. So I would say if young people are listening to this, that this is your moment to go out and to sort of change the world, because right now we need them to be going out and doing that, because from a economy that denies so many, from our collective wealth as a country to dealing with issues with climate change, this requires people who have courage to stand up and to actually have the courage of their convictions.
Yeah, I'd agree. You and I have always, I'd say, put in the time. You more so than I over the years. So
I disagree. You've done a lot too.
I do commend you, George. Now, take action has been your slogan. What does that actually look like on a random Tuesday morning for George?
Well, I can tell you that is the slogan for the election campaign for all of British Columbia. And I would say we have been taking action for British Columbians, whether it's been policy on consumer protection, whether it has been policy to ensure that young people can find affordable places to live. This has been a government that's been focused on taking action for people. So I've been fortunate to be part of it. The fact that we continue to have discussions with different stakeholders, like the project that is occurring in northern British Columbia with the North Coast Transmission Line, the work that we've been doing around hydrogen. I went and toured North Isle Copper and Gold in Port Hardy, which is a prospective mining project that could employ 600 people, create 2,000 indirect jobs, and right next door there is Cape Scott Wind Farm, and perhaps if that's expanded, that project, which currently provides the equivalent of 25,000 homes worth of energy and could be expanded to 750,000 homes, wow, that would end up providing significant opportunity in the North Island of British Columbia. So I think, as we're going back to the slogan of taking action, I think this government has taken a lot of action. I'm grateful to work alongside Premier Eby.
Now, you're new getting back into public life, George, which means you still have quite a trajectory ahead of you.
We'll see.
Well, if you were to look back on your time, say 20 years from now, what are you hoping people would say about your work and the impact that you've had on Canadians?
This might sound a little lame, but my only hope that if people were to look back on the work that I did, it would be that people would say that George Anderson was someone who cared. He cared about the issues and tried to deliver it. That's the best that I can do in my role as an elected official. If I did not run for some hope of delivering some specific project, it's that I want my nephews, my niece, and my neighbors and friends to be able to have the same type of opportunity that I did. My parents came to Canada in the late 80s as refugees with 3 small children. They got to Canada and felt something was missing, and then they had me. My sister hates that I tell the story that way, but they worked tirelessly to be able to give my siblings and I opportunity, and I've been fortunate to have a lot of great experiences, and I just hope that everyone else has the same type of experiences that I've had. So at the end of the day, that's what I would hope any type of legacy, if there is one, is that he cared about the people in his community.
Well, George, you certainly have accomplished a lot, and I appreciate your caring nature and your role as a political leader and as a friend. So if people want to get in touch with you or follow along your journey, where's the best place for them to do that?
Well, they could probably go to Google and type in George Anderson MLA Nanaimo, and all the social medias will fall up. I don't know. Anyway, they'll all be there. And then further, they can go to Instagram. That's George Anderson BC. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, all the social medias, even Threads. So
Threads too, yeah.
Yeah, so
lots to manage.
That's the way that they can connect. And also on YouTube, if people want to know what I'm talking about, all of the speeches that I've ever given in the legislature, they're all there. So
excellent. And any final words before we wrap up today?
I just hope that people choose to stay engaged and get involved, because unless active, caring citizens get involved, nothing in our society is going to change. And when people do get involved, it's for the better.
So there's our call to action today, folks. Appreciate you listening into the podcast today. But if there's something you care about, get involved in your community, because the decisions are made by those that show up. Thank you, George.
Thank you.